Hey guys, it's Alex. I've been getting a lot of questions about sound effects. Where do you find the right ones? How do you record them? How do you layer them together? I think it's really important to get sounds right from the source, so today we're going to be talking about field recording. A lot of people think sound work is sitting alone in dark rooms making weird noises for hours a day, and it is. But there's another component to this that's a little bit more fun too. Now, field recording is a huge subject, there's a lot to cover, but by breaking it down, showing you some of the stuff that I've worked on, while sharing some techniques that I use, my hope is that you'll be thinking about sound in a different way and bring industry standard techniques to any level of project that you're going to be working on. So if you're a filmmaker who wants to know more about sound, or you're wanting to get into the sound industry, or if you're just filming stuff at home for yourself and you want to know how to get better audio, adapting some of these techniques is going to be really helpful in stepping your audio game up. So the film that I want to talk about today is called Bright. If you haven't seen it, it's Netflix's first high-budget feature. It's basically World of Warcraft meets the LAPD. It's a crazy ride. There are a lot of cars, there are a lot of guns, there's lots of action, there's lots of stuff going on. And there were a lot of specific sounds that film needed that we really couldn't find anywhere else, so we had to go record them. So the production gave us access to all the cars that they used. Now, it's true of any sound, but especially with vehicles, there are a lot of nuances and details and subtleties that when they're captured right and used right, they really set professional audio content apart from amateur stuff. Additionally, the characters of those cars and how they're used in each project are going to be wildly different and they need to be captured accordingly. Like, I'm not going to take a beat-up old Honda Civic and record it the same way that I'm going to, say, a Bugatti Veyron Supersport or a LaFerrari. Now, that's a drastic example, and hypercars are a totally different thing. Maybe that can be another video. But the point is, each of these cars is unique, it has a unique timbre, and that's how we approach whatever sound source we're going to be recording, is to capture the nuances and the character of that. Now, with Bright, we had 2.5 days to record full workups on 6 cars. That means start, aways, idles, revs, various different speeds of buys, ins and stops, all the accessories that you don't think about, like doors, the glove compartments, the sun visors, the AC turning on and off, everything that we could possibly get. So that meant we had to be smart about what we were packing, and we needed to move fast to be able to get everything done in the time frame. Now, every movie that has a budget for recording has to hold on helicopters for 90% of the sound pass, which means that the majority of the budget just goes to sitting around being upset. If you've watched any movie in the last, ever, that uses cars in a chase scene, you know that perspectives are always changing. You're inside the car right up in the characters' faces, you're outside the cars, it's crashing into buildings, all kinds of stuff like that. So our goal when we're miking up the car is to get not just all of the general sounds of what it does, but also capture the show-specific moments that we needed to get to. There's also a scene where a tricked-out Subaru WRX has to spin in place doing a burnout, and then at one point we have a car get slammed into the front of another during a chase scene and it gets pushed at like 60 miles an hour sideways. And that's not the kind of thing that you can just go and search Pond 5 or freesounds.org and say, oh, give me this sound. It just doesn't exist. So how did we go about doing this? Pretty much every gas-powered vehicle has the same components that we always want to capture the sound of for these kinds of movies. That's the airbox, the exhaust, the engine compartment, and then the interior perspective. Now you'd think with things like buys, start and aways, in and stops, maneuvers like that, you'd want a huge line array of microphones splayed out across a street to capture every different perspective, but you can actually do all those with just one microphone if you take the time and place yourself and the mic right in the position that you want it to be capturing. For onboards, I rely a lot on lavalier microphones. So for the airbox, I'll actually take it apart, put a lavalier mic inside of it, and close it back up. And the air filter inside actually acts as a little bit of a dampener, so you don't get a lot of wind noise and buffeting. You just get this nice kind of suction sound of the air being filtered into the engine. For the rest of the engine compartment, I'll generally put a lavalier microphone pointing kind of towards the belts that the engine's turning, and then I'll run the cables around the outside of the hood so that they're out of the way and they're not going to get sucked into the engine and ruin the microphones or make the car explode or anything weird like that. For the exhaust, I put another lavalier microphone right above that, and the shape of the car actually deflects wind enough that we didn't get too much noise from that at all. And then I ran all those cables back into the car through cracks between the doors and the body into a recorder, so I was able to get all those perspectives at once. And then for the interior, I have a stereo shotgun microphone that's actually really great for just a single point I'm getting stereo stuff. And that serves as sort of an ambience for underneath driving scenes where people are inside of a car talking. You want to hear a little bit of the motion from the engine and a little bit of the road, but it can't be exterior perspective, obviously. So once we mic'd up each car, we'd start recording by doing a series of onboards at various different speeds. There's pedestrian driving, like on a residential city street where you're trying to obey traffic signs and do things like not hit pedestrians, into more freeway driving where it's faster, it's longer stretches of just straightaways, maybe a couple of lane change maneuvers, but generally just fast, steady straightaway kinds of stuff. And last we did chase driving, which is generally 45 to 65 miles an hour, harder turns, simulating a real car chase where, we gotta get out of here kind of feel. Now, a big component of every car chase sequence is tire skids. And pretty much every car scene in this film was a chase sequence. So we needed to get a lot of skids and we needed to get them isolated so that we could feature skids in the certain moments that you need and then pull them back to feature the engine sounds when you really gotta punch the throttle and alternate back and forth, having control over both of those components separately. The production supplied us with this Lexus GS300 from like 2002, kind of a generic sounding car, but the stunt team had actually fused the rear axle together, so the wheels had to spin together instead of independently. And basically, if you looked at this thing funny, it would skid all over hell and lose control. For that, we put a bunch of lavalier microphones right into the wheel wells on the rear tires. And of course, when you're recording the exterior of a car, you also need to get the interior perspective so that you can cut to it, which means that somebody has to be inside recording. The next challenge was the Subaru spinning in place. Now, I'm more of a Jeep guy than a Subaru guy, but one thing I do know about the WRX is that the traction control system is really, really good. So we had to figure out how to get this thing to lose control enough that we were able to spin it. We tried everything from driving it at high speed and pulling the emergency brake to literally strapping it to the back of a huge pickup truck and slamming it into gear to try and get the tires to spin out. And every single time, it would stall the car before it actually lost any traction. So after an hour or two of trying to get this car to do anything besides just drive really well, we ended up switching gears to try and get the car being pushed sideways at high speed. Now, that's not exactly something that's a regular occurrence. Well, maybe in Los Angeles, I don't know. So we had to try and figure out how to recreate that safely. And after trying a bunch of things that didn't work, we just strapped another car to the back of that pickup truck, shoved a recordist into it, and dragged it at high speed for as long as we needed to. That actually worked out really well, not only because it was safer to do it that way, but because the car being where it was blocked the sound of the engine from the truck and allowed the recordist to point the mic down into the tires that were skidding, so it all was the perfect situation. And after doing that a bunch of times, we realized that the sound of those skids might just work for that Subaru scene that we're having so much trouble with before. So by experimenting with how we mic'd the car, we actually solved another one of our problems just kind of by accident. Now, all these techniques are what you'd find on a higher budget production, but you can translate them to the independent world without that much of a budget or with no budget at all, as long as you have a microphone, a place to record, and of course, a vehicle. Car interiors are easy because all you need to do is bring a microphone in, hit record, and drive around for a little bit. Making sure that you cover pedestrian driving that's a little bit slower, and highway driving that's a little bit faster to cover all your bases. Exterior maneuvers like in and stops, start and aways, buys, three-point turns, parking, you want to make sure you get all of those, and you really just need a long stretch of road that you can drive on without too much contamination from other traffic. And again, if you're only working with one microphone, I'd say the biggest character component of any car is of course going to be the exhaust. So that's the place that you want to pay the closest attention to. If you're working with a lavalier, you can tape it just above the exhaust. If you're working with larger microphones, as long as you have a little bit of wind protection, we've built PVC pipe constructs and just strapped mics to the back of cars and it's sounded great. You work with what you have, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy as long as it sounds good. So if you're shooting any kind of content with a vehicle, it's going to be way easier to capture all this stuff on set so that you don't have to go back to it after the fact. Or if the video is already shot and you're working on the sound for it, knowing exactly what you need and using these techniques, you're going to be able to cover all your bases without any issue. A great example of this, I helped out one of my friends with an independent film a little while back that required the interior perspective of a car. So here's a clip from this scene with no sound. Our main character's just gotten some news that made her really angry. She's driving down a residential street at a normal speed. She's gonna turn her car around, shift it into reverse, get it back out onto the street, and then drive really aggressively back the way she came. Let's see what they captured on set with production audio. Not a whole lot. It's really just the basics of the interior of the car. You've got a little bit of the gear shift, but you don't really hear any of the character. You don't hear anything that's going to make it feel angry. Now, using the techniques that we just covered to record a car for this film, let's revisit this scene with the right sounds cut in to accentuate the angry driving from an interior perspective. So that feels a lot better. The sounds that were captured accentuate the mood of that moment and let you experience it as though you were right there instead of distracting you from the scene with sounds that don't fit or just don't work. And again, it's going to be much easier for you and better for the project if you capture some of this stuff on set while you're filming and take a little bit more time to get the sound right than it is to recreate it entirely after the fact. Hopefully this video provided some insight into how professionals think about sound and how you can apply those same techniques to your own content. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, come follow me over on Instagram at AXK. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Also, if you're curious about any of the gear that we used in these recordings, all of our lavalier microphones were Countryman B3s. They're really durable, they're great at taking loud sounds, and they're not too expensive. Our shotgun microphones were Neumann KMR 81Is, protected by Rycote wind protection gear, and we fed all of that into Sound Devices mix pre-recorders. If you're curious to know more about any of those, check out the kit link below.